"You're infertile trash." He slapped her and screamed those words in front of his mother. 10 years later, she crashed his wedding pregnant with twins and exposed every lie that built his empire. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to another story that will test your heart and remind you why we're all here together. Today's journey is about a woman who was broken by the man who promised to love her and how she rose from those ashes to reclaim everything he tried to take from her. Before we begin, I need something from you. This channel survives because of your love, your engagement, your presence. So please, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think, and most importantly, watch until the very end. Every view matters. Every second you stay tells the algorithm that we matter, that these stories of strength and redemption deserve to be heard. Now, settle in. Open your heart, because Laura's story begins in the most painful place imaginable and ends exactly where it needs to. The pristine marble floors of Dr. Garrison's fertility clinic echoed with each step Laura took as she walked toward the consultation room, Edward's hand resting stiffly at her lower back. For 2 years, they'd been trying for a baby. 2 years of hope morphing into quiet desperation with every negative test. And today would be the day that changed everything, though not in the way she'd prayed for. "Mrs. Alton, Dr. Garrison began, his eyes softening in that way doctors do when they're about to deliver bad news. "The comprehensive tests we ran show significant uterine complications from your previous surgery. I'm afraid natural conception isn't going to be possible." The room seemed to spin. Laura's breath caught in her throat as if someone had physically squeezed the air from her lungs. She'd prepared herself for obstacles, but the word impossible landed like a death sentence. Her hand instinctively reached for Edward's, desperate for the anchor she'd always found in him. But Edward's fingers remained motionless. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed somewhere over the doctor's shoulder, looking anywhere but at her. "There are options," Dr. Garrison continued gently. "IVF, with donor assistance, surrogacy, adoption." "We'll need time to think," Edward interrupted, standing abruptly. His voice was clipped, businesslike. "Thank you for your time, doctor." The drive back to their penthouse was suffocating. Laura stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline they'd admired together when Edward first proposed, pointing out which buildings would have the best views for their future children's bedrooms. Now those glittering towers felt like monuments to dreams that would never come true. "Edward, we should talk about this," Laura whispered as they pulled into their private garage. "There are still ways." "Not right now, Laura." His tone was ice. "I need space to process what you just told me." What I just told him? As if her infertility was a confession, a betrayal she'd committed against him. Laura saw it then, the way his gaze slid past her like she was already a stranger. Like her body's inability to conceive was a personal failing. A broken contract that voided their entire marriage. Inside their apartment, Edward went straight to his study and closed the door, a barrier more final than any lock. Laura found herself standing alone in the designer kitchen where they'd hosted dinner parties, where Edward had once lifted her onto the counter and kissed her while joking about teaching their kids to cook in this very room. Now she was just a woman standing in an empty space, holding the weight of a future that would never exist. The front door opened without warning. Margaret Alton swept into the apartment like a winter storm given human form, her Chanel suit pressed to perfection, her silver hair styled in that severe updo that made her look perpetually displeased. "Edward called me from the car," Margaret announced, not bothering with hello. "He told me about your condition." Laura stiffened. "It's not a condition, Margaret. It's a medical complication that has solutions." "Solutions?" Margaret's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "The only solution here is obvious. My son married you expecting a family, an heir to continue the Alton legacy. And you." Her cold blue eyes raked over Laura with disgust. "You can't even perform the most basic function expected of a wife. You're defective merchandise, dear. And in our family, we don't keep things that don't work." The word struck harder than any physical blow could have. Laura had endured 2 years of Margaret's passive-aggressive comments about when she'd finally give us grandchildren. 2 years of pointed comparisons to Edward's cousins, who'd already produced heirs. But this was different. This was weaponized cruelty. Surgical in its precision. "That's enough," Laura said, her voice shaking but firm. She rose to her full height, meeting Margaret's glare head-on. You don't get to... But before Laura could finish, Edward emerged from his study, his face a mask of cold determination, and the look in his eyes told Laura everything she needed to know about what was coming next. The moment Edward stepped out of his study, Laura knew. His face held that expression she'd seen him wear during hostile business negotiations, cold calculation masking something crueler underneath. Pack your things, he said simply. I want you out by tomorrow. Margaret's lips curved into a satisfied smile, finally showing some backbone, darling. Edward, wait, Laura's voice cracked. We can talk about this. There are options. We can. The slap came so fast she didn't see his hand move. The sharp crack echoed through the penthouse, and Laura stumbled backward, her cheek burning. Margaret gasped, not in horror, but in what sounded almost like vindication. You're infertile trash, Edward spat, his voice rising to a shout that rattled the crystal stemware in the bar cart. I married you to build a family, to carry on the Alton name. What good are you to me now? You're broken, defective, and I'm done pretending this marriage means anything. Laura's hand trembled as she touched her stinging cheek. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to make him see that she was still the woman he'd claimed to love. But the look in his eyes told her the truth. That woman had never really existed. She'd been a placeholder, a womb he'd expected to perform on command. 6 weeks later, Laura signed the divorce papers in her attorney's office, accepting a settlement that Edward's lawyers had described as generous. Translation: enough money to disappear quietly and never speak about what happened. Edward had already planted stories in the society pages about their amicable separation due to irreconcilable differences. And Laura moved into a modest apartment in Brooklyn, worlds away from the Manhattan penthouse. She sold the designer clothes Margaret had always insisted she wear and bought comfortable jeans and sweaters. She stopped attending charity galas where everyone whispered behind their champagne flutes. She built a new life, from scratch. Then came the morning she woke up nauseous, her body rebelling against even the thought of coffee. At first, she dismissed it as stress. But when the symptoms persisted, she took a pregnancy test with shaking hands. 2 pink lines. Laura stared at the test for 20 minutes, her mind racing through impossible calculations. The doctor had said natural conception was nearly impossible, but not completely impossible. Those weeks before the diagnosis, before everything fell apart, apparently her body had managed one final miracle. She should call Edward, tell him. This changed everything. But then she remembered his words. Infertile trash. The sound of his palm striking her face. The way Margaret had smiled as if Laura's pain was entertainment. The society columns already painting her as the failure who couldn't give New York's most eligible bachelor an heir. No. Laura placed her hand over her still flat stomach. These babies, because the ultrasound a week later would reveal twins, belonged to her. Edward had thrown her away like garbage. He'd made his choice. Now she would make hers. She wouldn't tell him. Not now. Not ever. If she could help it. Starting over proved harder than any business negotiation Laura had ever faced. She used part of her settlement to launch a boutique consulting firm, leveraging connections she'd made during her marriage, the real friendships, not the social climbers who dropped her the moment Edward did. Her expertise in nonprofit management and fundraising strategies attracted clients quickly. By her second trimester, Laura's company had 3 major accounts. By her third, she'd hired 2 employees and moved into an actual office. She worked until the day she went into labor, answering emails between contractions. The twins, a boy and a girl, arrived on a rainy October evening. When the nurse placed them in her arms, Laura felt something click into place. This was what strength looked like. Not marble penthouses or designer gowns or a husband's approval. Just her and these 2 tiny humans who depended on no one but her. Meanwhile, Edward's PR machine worked overtime. Laura heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd been telling anyone who'd listen his version of events. How he'd tried everything to save the marriage. How Laura's infertility had broken her emotionally. How she'd become impossible to live with. His family backed every word, painting him as the long-suffering husband who'd finally had to walk away for his own mental health. The tabloids ate it up. Billionaire Edward Alton moves on, after heartbreaking split. Laura saw the headlines while feeding her twins at 3 a.m., her phone propped against a pillow. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt nothing but pity for the man who'd never know these two perfect children existed. Let him have his lies. She had the truth sleeping in matching bassinets beside her bed. As the twins grew from infants to toddlers, Laura's business expanded. She hired a nanny she trusted, attended parent-teacher meetings, and closed deals worth 6 figures. She built a life that had nothing to do with Edward Alton and everything to do with the woman she'd become in his absence, stronger, sharper, and entirely her own. The twins asked about their father sometimes. Laura kept her answers vague but honest. He's not part of our family. They seemed to accept this with the easy adaptability of children who'd never known anything different. 10 years passed. Laura's consulting firm became one of the most respected in New York. Her children thrived in private school, talented and confident. And Edward's world continued spinning on its axis of carefully constructed lies. Never knowing that the woman he'd destroyed had risen from those ashes carrying the heirs he'd claimed to want so desperately. Until the day Laura received an engraved invitation to Edward Alton's wedding. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped between a stack of client proposals and her twins' school permission slips. Heavy cardstock, embossed gold lettering, the kind of ostentatious elegance that screamed old money trying too hard. Mr. Edward Alton and Miss Vanessa Hartley request the pleasure of your company. Laura stared at it for a full minute, her coffee growing cold in her hand. Vanessa Hartley, 28 years old according to the society pages Laura had seen online. A former model turned philanthropist, which in Manhattan circles meant someone who attended charity galas but never actually worked. Beautiful, polite, and most importantly, young enough that fertility wouldn't be a question anyone dared ask. The invitation shouldn't have reached her. Laura had changed her address, her entire life. But someone, probably one of Edward's assistants tasked with tracking down every former acquaintance, had managed to find her anyway. She should throw it away, burn it, pretend it never arrived. Instead, Laura set it carefully on her desk and pulled up her laptop. Within an hour, she'd compiled everything publicly available about Edward's life over the past decade. The business acquisitions, the charity board appointments, the carefully curated Instagram presence showing him at gallery openings and exclusive clubs. And there, woven through every interview and profile piece, was the same narrative, the tragic first marriage that ended because his wife couldn't handle her infertility, the years of therapy he'd needed to recover, the brave way he'd rebuilt his life. One article from Manhattan magazine particularly stood out. Edward Alton opens up about his painful first marriage and why he's ready to try again. I wanted children more than anything, Edward had told the interviewer. When we found out it wasn't possible, I thought we could face it together. But Laura, she couldn't accept it. The grief consumed her, and eventually, it consumed us. I had to let her go, even though it broke my heart. Laura's hand trembled as she closed the laptop. He'd weaponized her pain, turned it into sympathy for himself. Margaret and the rest of the Alton family had clearly backed his version of events, their silence erasing the truth of what actually happened in that penthouse. The rage that surged through her felt clean, purposeful. For 10 years, she'd focused on moving forward, on building a life that had nothing to do with Edward Alton. But maybe moving forward didn't mean letting him get away with rewriting history. Mom? Her daughter appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. Can we get ice cream after soccer practice? Laura looked at her all wild curls and gap-toothed grin, so confident and unburdened by the secrets Laura carried. Her son was probably already in the car, impatient as always. Absolutely, Laura said, tucking the invitation into her desk drawer. Go grab your brother. I'll be right there. The weeks that followed were a study in controlled planning. Laura hired a private investigator not to dig up dirt, but to verify the timeline. When exactly had Edward started dating Vanessa? The answer came back quickly. 8 months after the divorce, which meant he'd likely been seeing her before the papers were even signed. She updated her wardrobe, subtle designer pieces that spoke of quiet success rather than desperate attempts to impress. She booked appointments with her stylist, her personal trainer. Not because she needed Edward to find her attractive, she couldn't care less about his opinion, but because she needed to walk into that wedding looking like exactly what she was, a woman who'd thrived without him. The twins noticed the changes. "Why are you getting so dressed up for work?" her son asked one morning. "Because presentation matters in business," Laura replied, which wasn't a lie, just an incomplete truth. At night, after the twins were asleep, Laura would stand in front of her mirror, practicing what she'd say. How she'd tell Edward that the infertile wife he'd discarded had given birth to his children. How she'd expose his lies in front of everyone who'd believed his carefully constructed victim narrative. But revenge, she was learning, wasn't just about the confrontation. It was about the healing that made confrontation possible. Laura had spent 10 years building strength from the ruins of her marriage. She'd created a company that helped nonprofits change lives. She'd raised 2 remarkable children who knew nothing of betrayal or cruelty because she'd shielded them from it. She'd proven that her value had never been tied to her ability to give Edward Alton an heir. The wedding was still 6 weeks away. Laura marked it on her calendar with a small, satisfied smile. Edward had spent a decade believing he'd won, that he'd escaped a broken marriage and found happiness with someone better. He had no idea that the woman he'd destroyed was about to walk back into his life. Very much whole, very much pregnant, with the truth he'd thought he'd buried forever. Laura pulled out the invitation one more time, running her fingers over the embossed letters. She'd attend his wedding, and she'd bring the twins. Not out of spite, though that was part of it, but because after 10 years of silence, Edward Alton was finally going to face the consequences of his cruelty. And Laura was finally ready to deliver them. The morning of Edward's wedding dawned bright and clear. The kind of perfect September day that Manhattan society wives paid wedding planners 6 figures to guarantee. Laura stood in front of her bedroom mirror, fastening diamond earrings she'd bought herself 3 years ago after closing her biggest client deal. "Mom, do I really have to wear this tie?" Her son appeared in the doorway, tugging at the silk around his neck with obvious discomfort. "Yes, you do," Laura said firmly. "We're going somewhere very important today. A wedding for someone you don't even like," her daughter added from the hallway, already perfectly put together in the navy dress Laura had chosen. At 10 years old, she'd inherited her mother's sharp perception. "You've been weird all week." Laura met her daughter's eyes in the mirror. "Sometimes we have to do difficult things for the right reasons. You'll understand when you're older." The lie tasted bitter. Her children would understand today, when they finally met the father who'd never known they existed. The ceremony was being held at the Plaza Hotel, because of course it was. Edward had always favored grand gestures over genuine sentiment. Laura had confirmed through her investigator that security would be tight but not impossible to bypass. She had a legitimate invitation, after all, even if Edward likely hadn't expected her to actually use it. The cab ride through Central Park felt surreal. Her twins chattered in the back seat about missing their friend's birthday party for this, completely unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Laura's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress, a stunning emerald silk that complemented her complexion perfectly without trying too hard. "Are you nervous, Mom?" her son asked, his earlier complaints about the tie forgotten. "A little," Laura admitted. "But sometimes being nervous means you're about to do something important." The plaza's entrance was a chaos of arriving guests, photographers stationed discreetly to capture society's elite in their designer finery. Laura paid the cab driver and took a deep breath, placing one hand on each of her children's shoulders. "Stay close to me," she instructed. "No matter what happens, stay right by my side." Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, all white roses and crystal chandeliers, and enough candlelight to power a small city. 300 guests filled the gilded space, their conversations creating a low hum of anticipation. Laura recognized faces from a lifetime ago. Society matrons who'd dropped her the moment the divorce was announced, business associates who'd sided with Edward's version of events, members of the Alton family who'd watched Margaret destroy her and said nothing. She kept her head high as she moved through the crowd with her twins. A few people did double takes, recognition flickering across their faces before confusion set in. Laura Youngs wasn't supposed to be here. Laura Youngs had disappeared into obscurity a decade ago, broken and childless. Except here she was, radiant and confident, with two beautiful children who looked remarkably like the groom. "Is that?" she heard someone whisper. "It can't be. Who are those children?" The ceremony was about to begin. Guests were taking their seats, the string quartet launching into something classical and predictable. Laura positioned herself and the twins in an aisle seat 3 rows from the front, close enough to be seen, far enough to avoid immediate ejection. Edward entered from the side, looking exactly as he had 10 years ago. Perfectly groomed, expensive suit. That practiced smile he wore for public consumption. He took his place at the altar, nodding to guests, completely unaware of the bomb about to detonate in his carefully constructed new life. Then the music changed. The bride's entrance. Everyone stood. Vanessa Hartley appeared at the end of the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was stunning, glowing, utterly unaware that her wedding was about to become a spectacle. Laura felt her daughter's hand slip into hers. "Mom," she whispered, "why is everyone staring at us?" Because half the room had finally done the math, had finally noticed the children's features, the boy's strong jaw that mirrored Edward's, the girl's eyes that were the exact shade of his mother's. As Vanessa reached the halfway point down the aisle, Laura stood. The movement created a ripple effect. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-whisper. Even the bride faltered in her step, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Edward's eyes found Laura's across the crowded room. She watched recognition hit him like a physical blow, his face going pale, his practiced smile freezing into something closer to a grimace. Then his gaze dropped to the children standing beside her, and Laura saw the exact moment he understood. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. 300 guests held their collective breath as Edward Alton stared at the family he'd never known existed, while his bride stood abandoned in the middle of the aisle, her perfect day crumbling around her. Laura smiled. "Hello, Edward," she said clearly, her voice carrying in the crystal acoustics. "I believe we need to talk." The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Edward's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his complexion shifting from pale shock to a sickly gray. Vanessa stood frozen mid-aisle, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Laura," Edward's voice cracked on her name. "What are you? How did I get an invitation to your wedding?" Laura stepped into the aisle, her children flanking her like sentinels. "Someone on your team tracked me down. Very thorough of you. Though I suspect you didn't actually expect me to attend." Margaret Alton rose from her seat in the front row, her face twisted with barely contained fury. "This is completely inappropriate. Security? No." The word came out sharp and authoritative. Laura had spent 10 years building a business, learning to command rooms full of skeptical executives. This crowd was no different. "I think everyone here deserves to hear the truth about Edward Alton's first marriage. The real story, not the fairy tale he's been selling. Laura, please." Edward took a step forward, his hands raised in placating gesture. "This isn't the time or place." "When would be the right time, Edward?" Laura's voice rang clear across the ballroom. "Should I have waited another 10 years? Should I have let you build another life on lies while our children grew up never knowing their father existed?" The whispers started then, a wave of shocked murmurs rippling through 300 guests. "Children?" someone said. "Did she say our children?" Vanessa's face had gone white. "Edward? What is she talking about?" Edward's carefully constructed composure was cracking, fissures spreading across his polished exterior. "Vanessa, I can explain. She's clearly disturbed. We divorced because I was infertile?" Laura's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Is that what you told her? Is that what you've been telling everyone for 10 years? She gestured to her twins. "Do these children look like the product of an infertile woman?" Her son shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many staring eyes, but her daughter stood tall, her chin lifted with the same defiance Laura had learned to carry. "You told me your first wife couldn't have children," Vanessa said, her voice small and confused. "You said it destroyed your marriage, that she became unstable." "Unstable." Laura repeated the word like it was poison. "No, Vanessa. What destroyed our marriage was this. When we discovered I had complications that made natural conception difficult, not impossible, but difficult, Edward decided I was worthless. She turned her gaze back to her ex-husband, years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. Tell them what you did, Edward. Tell them what you said. I don't know what You slapped me. The words cut through his denial like a blade. In front of your mother. And you screamed that I was infertile trash. Those were your exact words. Then you threw me out of our home and filed for divorce within a week. The gasps were audible now. Several guests had pulled out their phones, either recording or frantically texting. Margaret's face had gone rigid, her eyes darting between her son and the growing scandal unfolding before her. That's not. Edward's voice was desperate now. You're twisting things. We tried to make it work, but the stress of infertility. Stop lying. Laura's voice cracked like thunder. I was 6 weeks pregnant when you threw me out. 6 weeks. I didn't know yet, but my body did. And when I found out, I realized something. You didn't deserve to know. You'd made it crystal clear that my only value to you was my ability to produce an heir. Well, congratulations, Edward. You got your heirs, a boy and a girl. They're brilliant, kind, and strong, and they've never needed you for a single day of their lives. Edward's knees seemed to buckle slightly. He gripped the back of a chair for support, his face a mask of genuine shock. That's impossible, the doctor said. The doctor said it was difficult, not impossible. But you didn't care about nuance or hope or fighting for our marriage. You cared about your image, your legacy, your perfect life. Laura's voice softened, but the steel remained. So you rewrote history, painted yourself as the tragic victim of a wife who couldn't give you children. Your family backed you up, society believed you, and I built a life that had nothing to do with your cruelty. Edward, Vanessa's voice was trembling. Is this true? Edward opened his mouth, but no words came. The great Edward Alton, master negotiator, Manhattan's golden boy, stood speechless in front of 300 witnesses. Margaret tried one final time. This is clearly a publicity stunt. Some desperate attempt at DNA tests are easy to arrange, Laura said calmly. I'd be happy to provide them. Though I think anyone with eyes can see the resemblance. She placed her hands on her children's shoulders. They have your nose, Edward. Your mother's eyes. The Alton jaw. All the genetic markers you claim to want so desperately. The crowd's whispers had grown to a roar. Phones were out everywhere now, recording the spectacular implosion of Edward Alton's wedding day. Vanessa had backed away from the altar, her bouquet dropped and forgotten on the floor. Laura had said everything she came to say. The truth was out, spreading through Manhattan's elite like wildfire. By tomorrow, every society page would carry the story. By next week, Edward's carefully crafted victim narrative would be in ruins. She'd won. Come on, Laura said softly to her children. We're done here. As they turned to leave, Edward found his voice one last time. Laura, wait, please. If they're really mine, if I have children, I want to be part of their lives. I need to. Laura stopped, looking back over her shoulder at the man who'd once made her feel worthless. No, she said simply. You made your choice 10 years ago. Now live with it. And she walked out of the Plaza Hotel with her head held high, leaving Edward Alton to face the consequences of his cruelty at last. Laura made it 3 steps toward the exit before Edward's voice cracked through the stunned silence. Wait. The word came out as a strangled cry. Laura, please, you can't just... She didn't turn around. Her hand tightened around her daughter's as they continued walking, the click of her heels against marble echoing through the ballroom like a countdown to Edward's complete unraveling. I said, wait. Edward's shout was raw, desperate, nothing like the controlled businessman who'd stood at the altar moments ago. Laura heard something crash, probably him stumbling into a chair, and then rapid footsteps as he ran after them. Edward, stop. Vanessa's voice was small, broken. Please, just let her go. No. He was breathing hard now, his composure shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. I can't, I need to. He caught up to Laura at the ballroom entrance, grabbing her arm. Please, just listen to me. Laura stopped, finally turning to face him. Up close, The destruction was complete. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his face blotchy and red, his eyes wild with something that looked like panic. The great Edward Alton, reduced to this. "Take your hand off me," Laura said quietly, her voice steel wrapped in silk. He released her immediately, both hands going up in surrender. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just—" His voice broke. "Are they really mine? Those children? Are they really? You know they are." Laura kept her children slightly behind her. Protective. "You saw it the moment you looked at them." Edward's eyes filled with tears. Actual tears, streaming down his face in front of 300 witnesses who'd gone completely silent to watch this spectacle. "I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't know you were pregnant when you slapped me and called me trash." Laura's voice was cold. "No, I'm sure you didn't. I didn't know either. But I found out 2 weeks after you threw me out. And I made a choice. The same kind of choice you made when you decided my only value was my fertility." "That's not I didn't mean," Edward was gasping now, his words tumbling over each other in his desperation. "I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. I was cruel, and I was stupid, and I—" He dropped to his knees right there in front of everyone, his expensive suit rumpling against the floor. "Please, please, Laura. Give me a chance. Let me be their father. Let me make this right." The crowd's murmurs had risen to a dull roar. Phones were everywhere, capturing every moment of Edward Alton's public breakdown. His mother sat frozen in her seat, her face a mask of horror at her son's display. Laura looked down at him, this man who'd once made her feel so small. Now he was literally groveling at her feet, and she felt nothing but a distant, cold satisfaction. "Mom?" Her son's voice was uncertain. "Is that really our dad?" "Biologically, yes," Laura said, loud enough for Edward to hear. "In every other way that matters, no." Edward's head snapped up. "I can change. I swear to you. I can be the father they deserve. I have money, resources. I can give them everything." "They already have everything," Laura interrupted. "They have a mother who chose them over revenge, who built a life where they feel safe and loved and valued for who they are, not what they can provide. They have stability, security, and self-worth. What exactly do you think you have to offer them, Edward?" "I'm their father." The words came out as a wail. "They're my children. You can't just keep them from me." "I can. I have. And I will continue to do so." Laura's voice remained perfectly calm, a stark contrast to Edward's hysteria. "You made a choice 10 years ago. You chose cruelty over compassion. You chose your image over your marriage. And when I discovered I was carrying your children, I chose to protect them from ever experiencing the kind of conditional love you offered me. But I've changed. Have you?" Laura gestured back toward the ballroom, where Vanessa stood abandoned. Her wedding dress a symbol of another woman Edward had used for his own purposes. "You told her I was infertile. You painted yourself as the victim. You were about to marry her based on the same lies you've been telling for a decade. That doesn't sound like someone who's changed. That sounds like someone who's very good at rewriting history to serve himself." Edward's face crumpled. He was openly sobbing now, his shoulders shaking. "Please, please, I'm begging you. They're my children. You deserve exactly what you're getting." Laura said, her voice quiet but final. "Public humiliation. Professional consequences. The knowledge that you threw away the family you claim to want so desperately. You don't get a second chance, Edward. You don't get to suddenly decide you want to be a father now that it's convenient or interesting to you." She crouched down slightly, meeting his eyes one last time. "My children will grow up knowing they have a mother who fought for them, who built a life for them, who showed them what real strength looks like. They'll never know the man who called their mother trash. That's my gift to them. And my final gift to you is this truth. You will live the rest of your life knowing they exist, knowing they're out there thriving without you, and knowing you have absolutely no right to be part of it." Laura stood, taking her children's hands again. Edward remained on his knees, broken and weeping. as she walked out of the Plaza Hotel into the bright September afternoon. Behind them, the wreckage of Edward Alton's carefully constructed life lay in ruins. Ahead of them, freedom stretched out like an open road. "Mom?" her daughter asked as they stepped onto the sidewalk. "Are we really never going to see him again?" Laura looked down at her daughter's face, so much stronger and more confident than Laura had been at that age. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "We're really not. And that's okay. We have each other. That's more than enough." And it was. The late afternoon sunlight hit Laura's face as she stepped out of the Plaza Hotel, warm and golden, like a benediction. Behind her, the muffled chaos of Edward's collapsed wedding filtered through the heavy doors' raised voices, the click of heels on marble, the frantic buzz of phones capturing every moment of Manhattan's juiciest scandal in years. Laura kept walking, her children's hands secure in hers, her head held high. "Mom, your phone keeps buzzing," her son said, glancing at her purse where notification after notification was lighting up the screen. "Let it," Laura said simply. She knew what those messages contained. Former friends suddenly remembering her existence. Reporters sensing blood in the water. Business contacts either offering support or distancing themselves. The machinery of Manhattan society grinding into motion, ready to devour Edward's reputation the way it had once tried to devour hers. But that wasn't her concern anymore. She'd said what needed saying. The rest would unfold exactly as it should. They walked through Central Park, the same paths Laura used to stroll with Edward when they'd first started dating, when she'd believed in fairy tales and happily ever afters. How young she'd been then. How naive. She'd thought love meant being chosen, being valued, being enough for someone else. Now she understood that love meant choosing yourself first, teaching your children to do the same. "Can we talk about what just happened?" her daughter asked, her voice small but steady. "About him?" Laura found a bench overlooking the lake and sat, pulling both children close. "What do you want to know?" Was he really that mean to you?" her son asked. "Did he really hit you?" The question hung in the air. Laura had spent 10 years shielding them from this truth, building a life so full of warmth and security that they'd never had to know their father's cruelty. Now it was out in the open, impossible to take back. "Yes," she said honestly, "he was. When he found out I had medical complications that made having children difficult, he decided I wasn't worth loving anymore. He said terrible things and hurt me, and then he left." "But you had us," her daughter said, confused. "So the doctors were wrong?" "Sometimes miracles happen when you least expect them," Laura said softly. "You two are my miracles. And the day I found out I was pregnant with you, I had a choice to make. I could tell your father, try to win him back, convince him I had value after all. Or I could realize that I'd always had value, that it was never about what I could give him, and that you deserved better than growing up around someone who only loved conditionally. So you chose us," her son said. "I chose all three of us," Laura corrected. "I chose the life we built together, the one where we support each other, trust each other, and know that our worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion." Her daughter was quiet for a moment, processing. "Do you think he'll try to find us? Try to make us talk to him?" Laura considered the question carefully. "He might try. But I won't let him hurt you the way he hurt me. You have the right to a father who's present from the beginning, who chooses you unconditionally, not someone who shows up when it's convenient and expects forgiveness without earning it." "Good," her daughter said firmly, "because I don't want to know him. He seems terrible." Laura smiled, pulling them both closer. "You know what? You're absolutely right." In the days that followed, the story exploded across every media platform. The wedding photos that guests had posted Edward on his knees, tears streaming down his face, Laura walking away with 2 children who looked exactly like him, went viral. Society columnists who'd once parroted Edward's victim narrative now scrambled to interview anyone who'd witnessed the confrontation. The Manhattan Magazine reporter who'd written that sympathetic profile called Laura's office 14 times before finally giving up. Edward's business partners began quietly distancing themselves from Alton Enterprises. Vanessa Hartley gave one tearful interview about being deceived about fundamental aspects of Edward's character, before disappearing from public view entirely. Margaret Alton released a statement through her lawyers claiming she'd been unaware of the complete circumstances surrounding her son's first marriage. No one believed her. Laura watched it all unfold from a comfortable distance, fielding the interview requests she chose to accept and ignoring the rest. She gave one carefully worded statement to the Times. "I'm grateful to finally have the truth acknowledged. My focus remains on my children and my business. I wish everyone involved the opportunity to learn and grow from this experience." Gracious, measured, devastating in its restraint. 2 weeks after the wedding that never was, Laura received a certified letter from Edward's attorney. Inside was a request for DNA testing and a formal petition for visitation rights. She forwarded it to her own lawyer with a simple note: "Proceed as we discussed." He signed away any rights when he signed those divorce papers. Document everything. That night, as she tucked her children into bed, her daughter asked, "Are you happy, Mom, with how everything turned out?" Laura considered the question. Was she happy that Edward had hurt her? No. Was she happy about the years of struggle, the nights spent crying, the slow, painful rebuild of her self-worth? Of course not. But was she happy with who she'd become, with the life she'd created, with these two remarkable humans who existed because she'd refused to let Edward's cruelty define her? Yes, Laura said honestly. I'm very happy, because I learned that I'm not the woman Edward tried to make me believe I was. I'm not broken. I'm not worthless. I'm strong, capable, and complete, all on my own, and you two are the greatest proof of that. She kissed them both good night and returned to her living room, where her laptop waited with tomorrow's work. Outside her window, the city glittered with possibility. Somewhere out there, Edward was facing the consequences of his actions. His reputation in tatters, his marriage destroyed before it began, his carefully constructed lies exposed for the world to see. And here she was, successful, fulfilled, surrounded by genuine love, and finally, completely free. Laura smiled and opened her laptop. Tomorrow, she had a pitch meeting with a Fortune 500 company. Next week, her daughter had a piano recital. Next month, her son's soccer team was heading to regionals. This was her life now. Not revenge or justice or proving anyone wrong. Just the beautiful, ordinary miracle of moving forward. Unburdened by the past, unlimited by someone else's cruelty. She'd taken control of her destiny. And it had been worth every single step of the journey. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Laura stood in front of 200 business leaders at the annual Women in Entrepreneurship Summit, delivering a keynote address about building resilience through adversity. She didn't mention Edward by name. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew her story. It had become Manhattan legend. The moment you stop defining yourself by someone else's opinion, Laura said, her voice clear and confident, is the moment you truly become free. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, a line of women waited to speak with her, to share their own stories of rebuilding after betrayal, after loss, after moments when they thought they'd never recover. Laura listened to each one, offering encouragement, business cards, genuine connection. This was her life now, not just surviving, but thriving in ways she'd never imagined possible when she was that broken woman standing in a penthouse, her cheek still stinging from Edward's hand. Her consulting firm had expanded to 15 employees. She'd been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and The Times. Major nonprofits competed for her expertise. She'd written a book about strategic growth in the nonprofit sector that had become required reading at Columbia's business school. But the real measure of her success wasn't in accolades or revenue. It was in the life she'd built with her children. Her daughter had discovered a passion for debate, arguing cases with the kind of fierce intelligence that made Laura's chest swell with pride. Her son had become a talented artist, his paintings covering the walls of their apartment bold, colorful expressions of a child who'd grown up feeling safe enough to be vulnerable. They were happy. Genuinely, completely happy. And they'd never known their father's cruelty because Laura had made sure of it. Edward's attempts to establish paternity and visitation rights had been quietly shut down by Laura's legal team. The divorce settlement he'd pressured her to sign included ironclad language about the finality of their separation. His lawyers argued that he hadn't known about the pregnancy. Laura's lawyers countered that ignorance born of cruelty didn't create retroactive rights. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd read every article about the Plaza Hotel incident, ruled in Laura's favor. Edward Alton had no legal claim to the children he'd unknowingly abandoned. Laura had felt nothing when she received the verdict. Not triumph, not anger, not even satisfaction. Just the quiet peace of a chapter definitively closed. She heard occasional updates about Edward through Manhattan's gossip network. His business had taken a hit. Several major clients had quietly moved their accounts elsewhere. His social standing had never recovered from the public humiliation. He'd become a cautionary tale, the subject of think pieces about toxic masculinity and the consequences of cruelty. Vanessa Hartley had married someone else, a kind investment banker who apparently treated her with genuine respect. Good for her, Laura thought when she'd read the announcement. Everyone deserved a chance at real love. Margaret Alton had retreated from public life entirely. The queen of Manhattan society, dethroned by her own complicity in her son's lies. But Laura didn't waste energy thinking about any of them. Her focus was forward, always forward. On a crisp November evening, Laura sat in the audience at her daughter's first major debate competition. Her son sat beside her, sketching in his notebook while they waited for the event to begin. Around them, other parents chatted and checked their phones, the ordinary rhythm of family life. "Mom," her son whispered, "do you ever wonder what life would be like if things had been different? If he'd been, you know, a good person?" Laura considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember that everything that happened led us here. To this moment. To the life we have. And I wouldn't change that for anything." Her daughter appeared on stage, poised and confident in her navy blazer. Laura watched her argue her case with passion and precision, every word landing with power. This child, who'd been born into circumstances she never asked for, had become someone extraordinary not despite her father's absence, but perhaps because of it. When the competition ended and Laura's daughter won first place, they celebrated with ice cream at their favorite shop in Brooklyn. The twins laughed and argued about toppings, ordinary and perfect and entirely theirs. Walking home through streets lit with early holiday decorations, Laura felt the weight of the past finally lift completely. She'd spent so long carrying the burden of Edward's cruelty, the shame of being discarded, the fear that she wasn't enough. But she'd always been enough. She just hadn't known it yet. "What are you smiling about?" her daughter asked, noticing Laura's expression. "I'm just happy," Laura said simply. "Right now. In this moment. With you two. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And she was. The woman who'd once measured her worth by a man's approval had become someone who defined success on her own terms. The broken, frightened person who'd signed divorce papers with trembling hands had transformed into someone strong enough to face her demons and walk away victorious. Laura Youngs was no longer a victim of Edward Alton's cruelty. She was an entrepreneur, a mother, a mentor, and a survivor who'd chosen to thrive. Her story wasn't about revenge or justice or proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming her narrative, protecting what mattered most, and building a life so full of love and purpose that the past became nothing more than prologue. As they reached their building, Laura looked up at the windows of their apartment, glowing warm against the cold November night. Home. Not a penthouse filled with designer furniture and cold elegance, but a real home filled with laughter and art and the beautiful chaos of raising children who knew they were loved unconditionally. Edward was a footnote now, a cautionary tale, a distant memory that grew fainter with each passing day. And Laura was finally, completely, triumphantly free. She unlocked the door and ushered her children inside, ready for whatever came next, because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Her worth had never depended on anyone's approval but her own. And that made her unstoppable. The end wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning, the first chapter of a story Laura was writing for herself, one beautiful day at a time. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.